Security guards flanked Patricia Whitmore as she stumbled down the airplane aisle, her designer heels catching on the carpet, mascara streaking down her flushed cheeks. Her screams pierced through the cabin. But 3 hours earlier, none of this chaos existed. 8-year-old Jasmine stepped onto that same airplane, clutching her butterfly backpack, completely unaware that this flight would forever change aviation history and expose the ugliest face of American racism. Before we dive into what happened on that fateful flight, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. If you believe every child deserves respect regardless of their skin color, hit that like button right now. And subscribe because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice in America. Now, let's rewind and see exactly how an innocent little girl's dream flight turned into a national reckoning. Jasmine practically floated through the jetway at LaGuardia Airport, her yellow flowered dress swishing with each skip. 2 neat braids framed her round face, secured with butterfly clips that matched her backpack perfectly. The 8-year-old had been counting down to this moment for weeks. Her very first solo flight, and Mama had booked her in first class. Rachel, the flight attendant stationed at the entrance, immediately noticed the unaccompanied minor tag dangling from Jasmine's backpack. The smile that spread across Rachel's face was genuine and warm. She knelt down to eye level with the little girl, taking in those bright, excited eyes that sparkled with pure joy. Jasmine clutched a worn teddy bear named Teddy under one arm, its fur matted from years of love and countless bedtime stories. Rachel took Jasmine's small hand and guided her through the first-class cabin, past rows of leather seats that seemed enormous to the child. Seat 2A, right by the window. Perfect for cloud watching. Jasmine bounced on her toes as Rachel helped her stow the backpack in the overhead compartment, making sure Teddy stayed safely in Jasmine's arms. The little girl chattered excitedly as Rachel fastened her seatbelt, explaining in that breathless way children do when they're bursting with happiness. Grandma Margaret was waiting in Atlanta. They were going to make peach cobbler from scratch, visit the aquarium, and stay up late watching movies. This was a special trip because Mama had to work all week on something very important, something about meetings and numbers that Jasmine didn't quite understand but knew meant Mama was helping lots of people. Rachel felt her heart warm listening to this sweet child's plans. She assured Jasmine that the crew would take excellent care of her during the flight, that she could ask for anything she needed, and that flying first class meant extra cookies and all the apple juice she wanted. Jasmine's eyes went wide with wonder at the mention of extra cookies. She settled into her seat, pressing her nose against the window, watching the ground crew load luggage below. Everything felt magical and special, exactly the way her mother had promised. That magical feeling shattered the moment Patricia Whitmore stepped aboard. The woman commanded attention without saying a word. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, clearly fresh from an expensive salon. The cashmere sweater she wore probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, a pristine cream color that screamed both wealth and impracticality. Strands of genuine pearls circled her neck in 3 delicate loops. Her designer handbag, with its unmistakable interlocking logo, swung from her forearm as she moved down the aisle with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. Patricia's leather heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step deliberate and purposeful. She handed her coat to Rachel without making eye contact, the gesture dripping with entitlement. When Patricia reached row 2 and glanced at her boarding pass, her face transformed. The polite, distant smile she'd worn while boarding twisted into something ugly. Her blue eyes landed on Jasmine, specifically on the child's brown skin, and narrowed with unmistakable disdain. Patricia stood frozen in the aisle for a long moment, staring at the little girl in seat 2A. Other passengers began backing up behind her, waiting to reach their own seats, but Patricia seemed oblivious to the growing line. She looked down at her boarding pass again, then back at Jasmine, as if hoping the child might disappear if she blinked hard enough. Finally, Patricia turned sharply and caught Rachel's arm as the flight attendant passed by with another passenger's bag. The grip was tight, fingers digging in through the uniform sleeve. Rachel's professional smile flickered slightly as she turned to address the passenger. Patricia leaned in close, her voice dropping to what she clearly believed was a discreet whisper but carried perfectly in the quiet cabin. "Excuse me, I think there's been some mistake. This child is sitting in first class." The words landed like stones. Rachel's training kicked in immediately, her face smoothing into careful neutrality even as anger sparked in her chest. She gently extracted her arm from Patricia's grasp and explained in a clear, professional tone that every passenger in first class held a valid ticket and proper documentation. Jasmine absolutely belonged in seat 2A. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She clearly wanted to argue further but seemed to calculate that making a larger scene right now wouldn't serve her purposes. Instead, she settled into seat 2B with exaggerated movements, her whole body language screaming displeasure. She arranged her belongings with jerky, aggressive motions, slamming her purse down harder than necessary, yanking the seatbelt across her lap with enough force that the buckle cracked loudly. The entire time, her eyes kept sliding toward Jasmine with undisguised contempt. She muttered under her breath, words like standards and dropped and really barely audible but absolutely intentional. Jasmine felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. Children possess a sixth sense for adult disapproval, and this woman's hostility radiated like heat from a furnace. The little girl's smile faded. She pulled Teddy closer to her chest, making herself smaller in the big leather seat. The excitement that had bubbled through her just minutes ago curdled into something cold and uncomfortable in her stomach. She didn't understand what she'd done wrong, but she knew with absolute certainty that the woman next to her hated her. Jasmine's fingers tightened around Teddy's worn paw as she stared out the window, suddenly wishing Mama was here instead of in some office building across the city. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, engines rumbling to life beneath their feet. Jasmine watched the terminal slowly recede, her face still pressed against the cool window. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she could see other jets lined up like enormous metal birds waiting their turn to soar. Despite the uncomfortable presence beside her, wonder began creeping back into Jasmine's heart. This was really happening. She was flying all by herself, like a grown-up. The seatbelt sign dinged off once they reached cruising altitude, and the cabin filled with the soft sounds of passengers settling in for the flight. Jasmine shifted in her seat, trying to get comfortable, when something outside caught her attention. The clouds stretched below them like an endless white ocean, their tops glowing golden in the afternoon sun. She couldn't contain her amazement. "Wow, the clouds are so pretty." The words burst out spontaneously, filled with innocent delight. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular, just expressing the awe that filled her 8-year-old heart. Patricia's response came swift and cold. "Could you keep your voice down? Some of us are trying to rest." The woman didn't even look at Jasmine when she spoke, just stared straight ahead with her eyes closed, as if the child's very existence was an assault on her peace. Jasmine flinched like she'd been slapped. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She mumbled a quiet apology, her voice so small it was barely audible, and pressed her lips together tightly. She wouldn't make another sound. She'd be good. She'd be quiet. Whatever this angry woman needed her to be. Teddy seemed heavier in her arms now, less like a companion and more like a shield. The joy had been completely sucked from the experience, replaced by a thick, suffocating awareness that she was unwelcome. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Jasmine didn't dare move, didn't dare speak, barely even dared to breathe too loudly. But Patricia's anger wasn't satisfied by the child's silence. If anything, the woman seemed to grow more agitated as the minutes ticked by. Patricia unbuckled her seatbelt with a sharp click and flagged down Michael, another flight attendant making his way down the aisle with a tray of drinks. The young man approached with a friendly smile that quickly became strained as Patricia launched into her complaint. Her voice rose steadily, loud enough now that passengers several rows away turned their heads to watch. "I paid $3,000 for this ticket. $3,000. I expect a certain level of," she paused dramatically, "decorum. Not to sit next to some charity case." The last two words dripped with venom. Michael's jaw tightened. He'd been working for this airline for 6 years and had dealt with his share of difficult passengers, but the naked cruelty in this woman's voice made his stomach turn. He kept his tone professional, though his hands clenched around the tray he carried. "Ma'am, every passenger in first class has a valid ticket. Is there a specific issue you need addressed?" His emphasis on the word specific was deliberate, a subtle challenge for her to voice exactly what her problem was. Patricia didn't hesitate. "The issue is obvious. Look at her." She gestured toward Jasmine without actually turning her head, as if the child wasn't worth looking at directly. "She clearly doesn't belong here. Her family probably used food stamps to buy that ticket." The words hit like physical blows. Jasmine heard every single syllable. Her eyes went wide, then filled with hot tears that she blinked back furiously. She would not cry. She would not give this mean lady the satisfaction. But her bottom lip trembled despite her best efforts, and her throat felt tight and achy. Michael set down his tray on an empty seat with more force than necessary. His brown skin flushed darker with anger, his voice dropping to a tone that brooked no argument. "Ma'am, I won't tolerate discrimination on this flight. Every passenger deserves respect." The statement hung in the air, clear and unambiguous. Several nearby passengers murmured agreement. But Patricia just laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that grated against the ears. "Discrimination?" Patricia's voice rose another notch, shrill and indignant. "I'm stating facts. These people always try to act like they're equal to us." The cabin went deathly silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade into the background of that horrific statement. "These people. Equal to us." The ugly truth of her beliefs laid bare for everyone to witness. An older black man seated in row 3 slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. Bernard was 70 years old, a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd flown more missions than he could count and had lived through enough racism to recognize it in all its forms. His voice was steady and firm, carrying the weight of decades of dignity maintained in the face of hatred. "Ma'am, that little girl hasn't done anything wrong. You need to calm down." His words were respectful but unmistakably a command. Patricia whipped around to face him, her face flushed red with rage. "Oh great, another one. What is this, a charity flight? Did they run some kind of special promotion I wasn't informed about?" Rachel appeared seemingly from nowhere, her expression harder than steel. As the senior flight attendant on duty, she'd been monitoring the situation from the galley, but this had gone far enough. She positioned herself between Patricia and Jasmine, her body language protective and unmistakable. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you continue this behavior, we'll have to file a formal report. You're creating a hostile environment and harassing a minor." The warning was clear, backed by federal aviation regulations that gave crew members significant authority over passenger conduct. Patricia seemed to realize she'd pushed too far. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the disapproving stares from other passengers, the crossed arms and disgusted expressions. She wasn't finding allies here. Her strategy shifted immediately. "Fine. I'll be quiet. But you people have no idea who you're dealing with." She settled back into her seat with exaggerated huffiness, but her war was far from over. It simply changed tactics. For the next 20 minutes, Patricia engaged in what could only be described as aggressive passive aggression. She spread into Jasmine's space, her elbow jutting across the armrest they shared, forcing the child to press herself against the window to avoid contact. She sighed loudly and frequently, long-suffering exhales meant to communicate her immense displeasure. She pulled out a bottle of perfume from her purse and sprayed it liberally, the cloying floral scent so overpowering that Jasmine began coughing. When the child covered her mouth and tried to muffle the coughs, Patricia shot her a look of pure disgust, as if Jasmine was deliberately trying to ruin her flight. The little girl's eyes streamed from the perfume, but she didn't dare complain. She just held Teddy tighter and tried to breathe through her mouth, counting down the minutes until this nightmare flight would end. Patricia reached for her phone with deliberate movements, making sure everyone nearby could see and hear what she was doing. She dialed with manicured fingers, then held the device to her ear, her voice immediately shifting to a tone of victimized outrage. "Yes, I need to speak to customer service immediately. I'm on flight 1847 and I'm being harassed by your staff." The performance was Oscar-worthy in its insincerity. She twisted every detail, inverted every truth. According to Patricia's version of events, she was the one being attacked. "Your employees are being incredibly rude to me. They're allowing unaccompanied minors to disrupt first class, and when I politely asked for help, they attacked me." She emphasized the word politely with special venom, as if repetition might make it true. Her voice carried through the cabin, ensuring maximum audience for her theatrical display of persecution. She wasn't done. Patricia demanded names, her finger jabbing the air as she spoke. "I want the names of every staff member who's been rude to me. Rachel, was it? And Michael? Write those down. I'm reporting all of them. My husband is a lawyer," she announced loudly, making sure everyone within earshot absorbed this crucial detail. "I know people on the board. Heads will roll for this." The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. She was wielding her privilege like a weapon, confident that her connections and wealth would shield her from consequences and destroy anyone who dared challenge her. Rachel and Michael exchanged glances from their positions in the galley, both of their faces tight with controlled anger, but they'd dealt with threatening passengers before. They knew better than to engage further right now. Document everything, stay professional, let the system handle it. But Jasmine couldn't maintain that professional distance. The little girl had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but 8-year-olds only have so much resilience. The dam broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks in hot streams, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She tried so hard to cry quietly, terrified of drawing more attention, more anger, but the sounds escaped anyway. Small hiccuping gasps that she muffled against Teddy's worn fur. Bernard, still watching from row 3, couldn't stand it anymore. He unbuckled his seatbelt again and moved forward, kneeling in the aisle beside Jasmine's seat. His weathered hand, scarred from decades of military service and hard work, gently patted the child's arm. "Sweetheart, don't let her get to you. You have every right to be here." His voice was soft, grandfatherly, filled with a kindness that made Jasmine cry harder because it reminded her that good people still existed. Patricia erupted at the sight of Bernard comforting Jasmine. "Don't you dare talk to me about rights." Her voice reached a pitch that bordered on hysteria. "I pay taxes. I contribute to society. What does her kind contribute? Nothing but problems." The mask had completely slipped now. Every ugly thought that had been simmering beneath her polite veneer came pouring out in a toxic stream. Her kind. The phrase echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. A woman named Lauren, seated across the aisle, slowly rose from her seat. She was 35, a middle school teacher from Connecticut, white-skinned with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She'd been watching this entire ugly scene unfold with growing horror. "That's enough." Lauren's voice cut through Patricia's tirade. "You're traumatizing a child. Have you no shame?" Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, not from fear but from the adrenaline that comes with standing up to cruelty. Patricia rounded on this new challenger, her face contorted with fury. "Shame. I should be ashamed for wanting quality service. For not wanting to sit next to, she gestured wildly at Jasmine, searching for words vile enough to express her disgust but apparently coming up empty. The sentence hung unfinished, but everyone knew exactly what she'd been about to say. Rachel moved swiftly down the aisle, positioning herself between Patricia and the rest of the passengers, her body language that of someone preparing for physical confrontation if necessary. "Mrs. Whitmore, one more word and I'm calling the captain." This is your final warning. The threat was real this time, no longer just procedure but genuine alarm at how far this situation had deteriorated. Patricia laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Call him. I want everyone to know how this airline treats paying customers. She was so convinced of her righteousness, so absolutely certain that her money and status put her above reproach. In the midst of all this chaos, Jasmine's small voice cut through. I want my mommy. 3 words, barely a whisper, but they hit Rachel like a freight train. The flight attendant's professional composure cracked slightly. She knelt beside Jasmine's seat, her hand rubbing gentle circles on the child's back. Sweetie, we're going to call your mom right now, okay? I promise, we'll fix this. Rachel's mind was already racing through protocols, trying to figure out how to handle this situation while keeping the child safe and calm. She motioned to Michael, who immediately understood and headed toward the galley to retrieve the contact information for Jasmine's guardian. But before they could move, Patricia's voice rang out again, dripping with contempt and false pity. Oh yes, call her mom. Probably working 3 jobs to afford this one ticket. What a waste. The cruelty was breathtaking in its casualness, as if she were commenting on the weather rather than deliberately traumatizing a child. Rachel guided Jasmine out of her seat with gentle hands, away from Patricia's toxic presence and into the relative sanctuary of the galley area. The little girl was still crying, her breath coming in shuddering gasps. Rachel grabbed a bottle of water and a clean cloth, kneeling down to Jasmine's level and carefully wiping the tears from her face. The flight attendant's heart ached watching this child try so hard to compose herself, to be brave. Honey, can you give me your mom's number? We need to let her know what's happening. Rachel kept her voice soft and reassuring, trying to create a bubble of safety in this small space. Jasmine nodded, her hands shaking as she reached into the front pocket of her butterfly backpack. She pulled out a laminated card, its edges worn from being handled. Mommy said if there's any emergency, show this card and call this number. Her voice was thick with tears and exhaustion. Rachel took the card, expecting to see a cell phone number and maybe a work contact. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. The card was heavy stock, professionally printed with an embossed logo at the top. Diane Carter, CEO, Skybridge Airlines, private line. Below that, a phone number with a direct extension that bypassed all secretaries and assistants. Rachel's hands began to shake. She looked from the card to Jasmine and back again, her mind struggling to process this information. Michael appeared at her elbow, ready to help with the call, and Rachel thrust the card at him wordlessly. She watched his face go through the same journey hers just had. Confusion, realization, then absolute horror. We have a situation, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible even in the quiet galley. This little girl's mother is the Diane Carter. She owns this airline. Michael's face went pale. The CEO. Oh my God. That woman out there just attacked the owner's daughter. The implications crashed over both of them like a tidal wave. But Rachel's training kicked in, overriding the panic. Protocol existed for exactly these kinds of situations, even if the specific circumstances were unprecedented. We need to handle this perfectly. Call the captain, tell him to contact corporate immediately. And get me connected to Mrs. Carter's office now. Her voice was steady now, professional competence taking over from shock. Michael nodded and practically ran toward the cockpit, while Rachel pulled out the special phone line that connected directly to ground operations. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she dialed the number on the card, each ring feeling like an eternity. The phone was answered on the second ring, a crisp professional voice announcing that she'd reached Diane Carter's private line. Rachel identified herself, her flight number, and requested immediate connection to Mrs. Carter. There was a brief pause, then the line clicked over. Mrs. Carter. This is Head Flight Attendant Rachel Morrison from Flight 1847. Rachel paused, trying to find the right words. Your daughter is safe, but there's been a serious incident. On the other end of the line, silence. Then Diane Carter's voice, tight with controlled fear. What happened? Is Jasmine hurt? Rachel could hear the terror beneath the composure, the primal panic of a mother imagining her child in danger. Rachel quickly recounted the entire nightmare, from Patricia's initial complaints to the escalating harassment, the discriminatory language, the cruel comments, everything. She didn't sugarcoat or minimize. Mrs. Carter deserved to know exactly what her daughter had endured. When Rachel finished, there was silence on the line for 5 long seconds. When Diane spoke again, her voice had transformed into something cold and sharp as a blade. Let me speak to my daughter. Rachel handed the phone to Jasmine, whose small hands could barely hold it steady. Mommy? The word came out as a sob. Jasmine's composure shattered completely now that she had her mother on the line. That lady said mean things about me. She said I don't belong here. The words tumbled out between hiccuping breaths, all the fear and hurt pouring through the phone connection. Diane's response was immediate and fierce. Baby, you listen to me. You belong wherever you choose to be. That woman is wrong. Very, very wrong. And she's going to learn that lesson today. The steel in Diane's voice was unmistakable, a promise of consequences that would be severe and permanent. Mommy loves you so much. You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Nothing. Jasmine nodded even though her mother couldn't see her, drawing strength from that familiar voice. After a few more reassurances, Diane asked to speak with Rachel again. Rachel took the phone back, stepping away slightly so Jasmine couldn't hear the full conversation. Mrs. Carter's voice came through crisp and commanding. Rachel, here's what's going to happen. I want full statements from every witness. I want that woman's name, address, every piece of information you can legally obtain. I'm contacting our legal team right now. She's going to face criminal charges for child harassment and hate crimes. And Rachel? Her voice softened slightly. Thank you for protecting my baby. You and everyone who stood up for her, I won't forget that. Rachel felt tears prick her own eyes. We just did what was right, Mrs. Carter. Diane's response was quiet but intense. And that's exactly why you'll be rewarded. But first, I have some calls to make. The line went dead, and Rachel knew with absolute certainty that Patricia Whitmore's world was about to implode. Now, before we see what happens next, if you think Patricia deserves everything that's coming to her, comment the number 1 right now. Smash that like button if you believe Diane Carter is about to deliver the justice this situation demands. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this story is about to reach a level of satisfaction you won't believe. Here's a question for you, what do you think Diane Carter's first move should be? Criminal charges? Lifetime ban from all airlines? Public exposure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, back to our story, because Patricia is about to discover that karma doesn't just exist in theory. Captain Thomas Wright had been flying commercial aircraft for 32 years. He'd handled hijacking attempts, medical emergencies, mechanical failures, and every variety of difficult passenger imaginable. But when Michael burst into the cockpit with news of what was happening in first class, the veteran pilot felt an anger unlike anything he'd experienced in decades of service. A grown woman verbally assaulting an 8-year-old child with racist attacks. Not on his aircraft. He set the plane on autopilot, instructed his co-pilot to monitor their course, and headed back into the cabin with purposeful strides. Captain Wright cut an imposing figure even without the authority of his uniform. At 58 years old, he stood 6 feet tall, his posture ramrod straight from years in the Air Force before transitioning to commercial aviation. His dark skin showed traces of gray at the temples, and his eyes held the calm confidence of someone who'd made life and death decisions at 40,000 feet. He emerged from the cockpit and moved directly to row 2, where Patricia sat with her arms crossed, radiating self-righteous indignation. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Captain Wright. I've been informed of your behavior, and I'm here to give you one final warning. His voice carried through the cabin, deliberately public. He wanted every passenger to witness this. Patricia looked up at him, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Perhaps the realization that this situation was escalating beyond her control. But her arrogance won out. She stood, drawing herself up to her full height, though she still had to crane her neck to meet the captain's eyes. Finally. Someone with authority. Captain, I want that child moved to economy where she belongs. And I want those flight attendants disciplined for their rudeness. She gestured toward where Rachel and Michael stood nearby, her tone suggesting she was ordering coffee rather than demanding people lose their livelihoods. Captain Wright's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to a tone that made smart people reconsider their choices. Ma'am, you've been verbally abusing an 8-year-old child and using racially discriminatory language. That violates federal aviation regulations and our airline's code of conduct. He let each word land with weight, ensuring she understood this wasn't a customer service issue but a legal one. Patricia's face flushed red, but she doubled down. Discriminatory? I never said anything about race. I simply pointed out that she doesn't meet the standards of first class. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity, denying what dozens of witnesses had heard with perfect clarity. Captain Wright pulled a small notebook from his pocket. We have multiple witnesses, including passengers and crew, who heard your exact words. Mrs. Whitmore, you need to cease this behavior immediately, or I will divert this flight and have you removed by federal authorities. The threat wasn't empty. He had full authority to do exactly that. Patricia's confidence wavered. You can't threaten me. Do you know who my husband is? Do you know what connections I have? The desperation in her voice betrayed her growing fear, but she clung to her privilege like a life raft, certain it would save her. Bernard, who'd returned to his seat but remained vigilant, stood again. Captain, I'm a witness. I heard everything she said. It was pure racism, no question about it. His voice was steady, factual, the testimony of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms as an expert witness on military matters. Lauren added from across the aisle, me too, Captain. She called that child charity case, said her kind doesn't contribute to society. It was disgusting. Other passengers began speaking up, a chorus of confirmation that left no doubt about what had transpired. Patricia looked around wildly, seeing her narrative crumbling. You're all ganging up on me. This is conspiracy. Her voice climbed toward hysteria. She was so convinced of her own victimhood that the reality of universal condemnation seemed impossible to process. Captain Wright stepped closer, his presence commanding. Mrs. Whitmore, return to your seat and remain silent for the rest of this flight. If you speak one more word to or about that child, I will divert to the nearest airport. Am I clear? His tone left no room for argument. Patricia sank into her seat, her face a mottled combination of red and white, fury and fear warring for dominance. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then snapped it shut, her jaw working soundlessly. Captain Wright nodded once, satisfied, and returned to the cockpit. The cabin settled into tense quiet, passengers returning to their books and devices, though many kept surreptitious watch on row 2. 10 minutes passed. 15. The tension gradually eased as it seemed Patricia had finally learned her lesson. Rachel checked on Jasmine, who was slowly calming down in the galley with a cup of apple juice and a cookie she was too upset to eat. But then, inevitably, Patricia's poison needed an outlet. She started quietly at first, murmuring to herself. This is ridiculous. Treated like a criminal on a plane I paid good money for. Her voice grew incrementally louder. You all saw how they treated me. I'm the victim here. Several passengers shot her warning looks, but Patricia seemed unable or unwilling to stop herself. The words kept spilling out, her sense of persecution overwhelming any sense of self-preservation. Rachel heard it immediately from her position in the galley. She made eye contact with Michael, who was already moving toward the cockpit. Within 30 seconds, Captain Wright's voice came over the intercom, crisp and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security situation, we are diverting to Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Law enforcement will board the aircraft upon landing. We apologize for the inconvenience." Patricia's head whipped up, her face going from red to sheet white in an instant. "Wait, what? No. You can't do this." She half rose from her seat, gripping the armrests. Around her, passengers looked at each other with expressions ranging from satisfaction to relief. A few pulled out their phones, quickly texting family about the delay but including details about the racist passenger getting what she deserved. Patricia's breathing accelerated, panic setting in as she realized this wasn't a bluff or a scare tactic. The captain was actually diverting the flight. Because of her. The aircraft began its descent, the change in altitude perceptible. Patricia's hands shook as she gripped her purse, her mind clearly racing through possibilities, calculating consequences, and finding no escape route. The privileged bubble she'd lived in her entire life was about to pop spectacularly, and there wasn't a single thing she could do to stop it. The landing at Charlotte Douglas International was smooth and professional, but the atmosphere inside the cabin crackled with anticipation. As soon as the aircraft reached the gate, Captain Wright's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until law enforcement has boarded and completed their business. Thank you for your patience and cooperation." The seatbelt sign stayed illuminated. Outside the windows, passengers could see several vehicles with flashing lights pulling up to the aircraft. Patricia had shrunk into her seat, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She tried pleading with Rachel during the descent. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'll be quiet, I promise." But Rachel had simply informed her that the decision was out of their hands now. Federal authorities were involved. There was no going back. The forward door opened with its characteristic mechanical sound. 4 FBI agents in dark suits entered first, their presence immediately commanding attention. Behind them came 2 airport security officers in uniform. The lead FBI agent, a woman named Rodriguez with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, scanned the cabin until Captain Wright emerged from the cockpit and gestured toward row 2. Agent Rodriguez approached Patricia's seat with measured steps. "Patricia Whitmore. We need you to come with us." Her voice was professionally neutral, but her hand rested near her hip in a way that suggested she was prepared for resistance. Patricia's face crumpled. "This is insane. I haven't done anything illegal." Her voice climbed toward hysteria again, drawing stares from the surrounding passengers who were recording on their phones despite instructions to remain seated. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a laminated card and began reading in that distinctive law enforcement cadence. "Ma'am, you've violated federal aviation regulations regarding passenger interference and harassment. Specifically, Code of Federal Regulations Title 14, Part 121, which prohibits behavior that interferes with crew members' duties or creates a disturbance. Additionally, we're investigating potential hate crime violations. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda warning continued as Patricia tried to interrupt, her protests growing more frantic. "I want my lawyer. This is a setup. That child shouldn't have been in first class in the first place." Each word she spoke only dug her hole deeper, providing evidence of the very discrimination she claimed didn't happen. Agent Rodriguez's partner, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, moved to Patricia's other side. "Ma'am, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us. Now." The walk of shame down the aisle seemed to take forever. Patricia stumbled in her expensive heels, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. Passengers openly stared, some filming, others simply watching with expressions of satisfaction. As Patricia reached the middle of the cabin, a sound started. Slow clapping. It came from Bernard first, his weathered hands coming together in deliberate applause. Then Lauren joined. Within seconds, half the first-class cabin was applauding, not mockingly but with genuine appreciation for justice being served. Patricia's face flushed deep red, humiliation finally penetrating her armor of privilege. She tried to walk faster, to escape this nightmare, but the FBI agents controlled the pace, ensuring everyone saw exactly what happened to people who chose hatred over humanity. At the door, Patricia turned back one last time, her eyes wild. "You'll all regret this. I'll sue every one of you." The threat rang hollow, desperate, the last gasp of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. Once Patricia was off the aircraft, the atmosphere transformed instantly. Tension released like a snapped rubber band. Passengers began talking excitedly, sharing observations about what they'd witnessed, exchanging contact information to serve as witnesses if needed. Rachel made her way back to the galley where Jasmine sat, still clutching Teddy but no longer crying. The little girl looked up with red-rimmed eyes as Rachel knelt beside her. Is she going to come back? The fear in that small voice broke Rachel's heart all over again. No, sweetheart. She's never going to bother you again. I promise. Rachel pulled Jasmine into a gentle hug, feeling the child's small body gradually relax. Captain Wright emerged from the cockpit and walked directly to where Jasmine sat. He knelt down, his imposing frame folding into a grandfatherly posture. "Young lady, I want to apologize on behalf of our airline. What happened to you was wrong, and we're going to make sure it never happens to anyone else." Jasmine looked at this serious man with all his official badges and stripes, then asked in a whisper, "Did I do something bad?" The question stabbed through every adult who heard it. This child, who'd been verbally assaulted and traumatized, was worried that she'd done something wrong. Captain Wright's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "No, honey. You didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. That lady had problems in her heart, and that's not your fault. Never your fault." He reached out and gently patted her hand. "Your mommy always says people should be kind to everyone." Jasmine offered this wisdom like a precious gift. Captain Wright smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Your mother sounds like a very wise woman." He had no idea just how powerful that wise woman was, or what storm she was about to unleash. The aircraft prepared for departure again, this time with one less passenger and a completely different energy. As they taxied back toward the runway, passengers treated Jasmine like a small celebrity. Robert and Susan, a couple in their 50s, came over with a packet of gourmet cookies. "We're so sorry you had to go through that, sweetie. Would you like some cookies?" Jasmine's face brightened for the first time in hours. "Yes, please. Thank you." Such good manners despite everything she'd endured. 45 minutes later, Flight 1847 touched down in Atlanta right on schedule despite the diversion. Rachel held Jasmine's hand as they deplaned, the little girl's butterfly backpack bouncing against Rachel's hip as they walked up the jetway. At the gate, a small crowd had gathered, but two figures stood out. Margaret, Jasmine's grandmother, was an elegant woman of 65 with silver hair styled in soft curls and a face that radiated warmth. Beside her stood Diane Carter, and even without introduction, Rachel would have known this was someone important. Diane was 38 years old with flawless dark skin, natural hair styled in an elegant twist, and a black Armani suit that probably cost more than Rachel made in a month. But her designer appearance was completely at odds with her expression. Diane's eyes were red-rimmed, her perfect makeup streaked, every inch of her radiating maternal fear and fury. The moment Jasmine spotted them, she dropped Rachel's hand and ran. "Mommy! Grandma!" Her voice echoed through the gate area. Diane dropped to her knees, not caring that her expensive suit hit the airport carpet, and caught her daughter in her arms. The hug was fierce, desperate, a mother clutching her child after nearly losing her. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Diane's voice broke, tears flowing freely now. She pulled back just enough to cup Jasmine's face in her hands, examining every inch as if checking for injury. Jasmine was crying too, all the fear and hurt pouring out now that she was safe. "She said I don't belong, Mommy. She said mean things about you too." The words came between sobs, and with each one, Diane's expression hardened further. Margaret wrapped her arms around both of them, adding her strength to the embrace. "My precious girl. Some people have hate in their hearts, but that's their problem, not yours." Rachel approached hesitantly, not wanting to intrude on this family moment. "Mrs. Carter." Diane looked up, still kneeling, her arm around Jasmine. Rachel began delivering her report, professional and thorough, detailing every moment of the flight, every witness, every piece of documentation they'd gathered. Diane listened with the focused intensity of someone processing information for strategic use. When Rachel mentioned the other passengers who'd stood up for Jasmine, particularly Bernard and Lauren, Diane's expression softened slightly. "Rachel, thank you for protecting my daughter. Michael, Bernard, Lauren, everyone who stood up for her, they'll be hearing from me personally. The good way." Her emphasis made clear she intended to reward courage and decency. Rachel felt relief wash over her. "We just did what was right, Mrs. Carter." Diane stood, keeping one hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "And that's exactly why you'll be rewarded. But first, I have some calls to make. That woman is going to face every legal consequence available." Captain Wright emerged from the jetway with his crew, his uniform jacket slung over one arm. He spotted Diane immediately and approached with the bearing of someone used to command but also capable of deep respect. "Mrs. Carter, your quick action saved my daughter from further trauma. Thank you." Diane extended her hand, which Captain Wright shook firmly. "Mrs. Carter, I've been flying for 30 years. What happened today was one of the most disgraceful displays I've ever witnessed. That passenger will never fly again, I'll make sure of it personally." Diane's smile was sharp as a knife. "She won't. I'm filing criminal charges for child endangerment, harassment, and hate crimes. And I'm banning her from every airline in our alliance network. That's 43 airlines worldwide." Captain Wright's eyebrows rose. He'd known Diane Carter was powerful, but the scope of her reach was staggering. Good. People like that need to understand actions have consequences. Diane knelt again, bringing herself to Jasmine's eye level. "Baby, Mommy has to handle some grown-up business. You go with Grandma, okay? We'll make peach cobbler tonight, and I'll be home for dinner. I promise." Jasmine looked uncertain, clearly not wanting to let her mother out of sight. "Are you going to make sure she can't hurt other kids?" The question showed wisdom beyond her 8 years. Diane's expression was fierce and proud. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Jasmine nodded, satisfied with this answer, and took Margaret's hand. The older woman stroked her granddaughter's hair. "Come on, baby girl. Let's go home." As they walked away, Jasmine turned back once, waving at Rachel and Captain Wright. "Thank you for taking care of me." The simple gratitude from this child who'd endured so much made several adults in the vicinity blink back tears. Diane watched them go, then turned back to the crew with an expression that would have made sharks nervous. "Now, let's discuss exactly how we're going to ensure this never happens again." 1 week later, Patricia Whitmore sat in a leather chair in her attorney's office, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the fact that her entire life was crumbling around her. Thomas Brennan was one of Boston's most expensive lawyers, specializing in defending the wealthy from the consequences of their actions. But even he looked grim as he reviewed the documents spread across his mahogany desk. "Patricia, this is bad. Very bad." He didn't soften the blow, didn't try to spin it positively. She needed to understand the severity of her situation. Patricia leaned forward, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'm the victim. I was just expressing my opinion." The refrain she'd repeated so many times it had become a mantra, as if repetition might make it true. Brennan slid a tablet across the desk toward her. "Your opinion was recorded on multiple devices. Passengers filmed you. The airline has audio recordings from the cabin monitoring system. And worse, do you know whose daughter you attacked?" Patricia's stomach dropped. "Some random black woman's kid. So what?" She tried to maintain her contempt, but her voice wavered. Brennan's expression could only be described as pained. "Diane Carter. The CEO and majority owner of Skybridge Airlines. She's worth $2.3 billion. She owns 7 airlines globally. She sits on the boards of 15 Fortune 500 companies. And you called her daughter a charity case." Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her vision tunneled slightly as the full implications crashed over her. "Oh God. Oh no." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. She'd known she was in trouble, but this was catastrophic. Brennan wasn't finished. "It gets worse. Mrs. Carter has filed criminal charges. The FBI is investigating you for violating federal aviation safety laws under Title 49 U.S.C. Section 46504. That's interference with flight crew members. You face up to 20 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. Just for the federal charge. That doesn't include state charges for child harassment, creating a hostile environment, and potential hate crime violations." Patricia made a strangled sound, her hand flying to her throat. "I didn't know. If I had known who she was." She stopped, realizing what she was saying. Brennan pounced on it immediately. "So you would have treated her differently if you knew her mother was rich? That's the definition of discrimination, Patricia. You just admitted it. And for the record, it shouldn't matter who her mother is. Harassing any child is wrong." The rebuke was sharp and deserved. Patricia began crying, mascara running down her face in black streams. "Can we settle? I'll apologize. I'll pay money." The desperation was palpable. She'd do anything to make this nightmare go away. Brennan shook his head slowly. Mrs. Carter rejected 3 settlement offers. Each one more generous than the last. She wants this to go to trial. She said, and I'm reading from her statement here, "Every child deserves protection, not just mine. This woman needs to face full consequences so others think twice before choosing hatred." Patricia made a sound between a sob and a scream. "My reputation is ruined. The museum fired me. The country club revoked my membership. My friends won't talk to me. Even James is filing for divorce." Her husband of 23 years couldn't distance himself fast enough once the videos went viral online. But Brennan still wasn't done cataloging the destruction. "There's more. 23 airlines have permanently banned you from flying. Hotels chains including Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt have blacklisted you. Hertz and Enterprise won't rent you cars. Even Royal Caribbean and Carnival have banned you from their cruise ships. Mrs. Carter's influence is enormous, and she's using all of it." Patricia stared at him in horror. How is this fair? It was just words. The complete lack of understanding was almost impressive. Brennan closed the folder in front of him with an audible snap. "Words have consequences, Patricia. Especially when they're targeted at an 8-year-old child. Now, we have 3 options, none of them good." He began outlining potential defense strategies, but Patricia barely heard him. Her mind was stuck on one thought: if she just kept her mouth shut, if she just ignored the child, none of this would be happening. The scene shifted to a gleaming conference room on the 42nd floor of Skybridge Airlines headquarters in downtown Atlanta. Diane Carter stood at the head of a massive table, surrounded by 50 CEOs representing major airlines from across North America and Europe. She'd called this emergency summit, and not a single person had declined. Her influence and the seriousness of the incident ensured full attendance. "Colleagues, what happened to my daughter happens to countless children every day. Black children, Latino children, Asian children, any child whose appearance doesn't match someone's prejudiced idea of who belongs in first class." Diane's voice rang with conviction. "Today, we're launching the Fly with Dignity initiative. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Lifetime bans that span our entire network. Criminal prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. Mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and stopping discrimination. And a 24-hour hotline for victims to report incidents and receive immediate support." She clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screens lining the walls. The first slide showed Jasmine's tear-stained face. "My daughter's trauma will not be in vain. We're going to change this industry. No more passing the buck. No more quiet settlements. When someone chooses hatred on our aircraft, they face consequences that hurt." Around the table, heads nodded. Several CEOs spoke up with their own stories of discrimination they'd witnessed or experienced. By the end of the 90-minute meeting, all 50 airlines had signed the Fly with Dignity Compact. The document would revolutionize how airlines handle discrimination complaints. Diane felt a grim satisfaction as she collected the signatures. Patricia Whitmore had wanted to put a black child in her place. Instead, she'd sparked a movement that would protect millions of children from experiencing what Jasmine had endured. The courtroom was packed the day Patricia Whitmore was sentenced. Media lined the back rows, cameras ready to capture this high-profile case that had sparked national conversations about racism, privilege, and accountability. Patricia stood before the judge, her expensive lawyer beside her, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd boarded that flight 6 months ago. Her hair had grown out, showing gray roots she hadn't bothered to color. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress from a department store. Her face was drawn, aged years in months. Judge Maria Henderson, a no-nonsense black woman who'd heard every excuse imaginable in her 20 years on the bench, reviewed the case file one final time before speaking. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been found guilty of interfering with a flight crew, child harassment, and creating a hostile environment based on racial discrimination. These are serious crimes that endangered passengers and traumatized a child." The judge looked up, her gaze piercing. "You've shown some remorse during these proceedings, though I note it came only after you understood the consequences you'd face. Real change requires understanding why your actions were wrong, not just regret at being caught. For your crimes, I sentence you to 18 months in prison, suspended, meaning you'll serve this time on probation instead of incarceration. However, you will complete 500 hours of community service specifically working with diverse populations. You will pay a fine of $100,000, which will be donated to the Jasmine Foundation for Civil Rights. And you will attend a year-long program on racial sensitivity and implicit bias." Patricia's shoulders sagged with relief at avoiding prison, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm upholding the lifetime flight ban. You will not fly on any commercial airline for the rest of your life. This is a consequence of your choice to weaponize your privilege against a child." Court dismissed. 3 months into her community service, Patricia found herself at the Mercy Community Center in a predominantly black neighborhood in Atlanta, serving lunch to people experiencing homelessness. It was humbling work, made more so by the fact that many of the people she served recognized her. The videos from the plane had gone viral. She was internet infamous, her face synonymous with entitled racism. As she ladled soup into a bowl for an elderly black woman named Dorothy, her hands shook slightly. "I'm sorry," Patricia whispered, barely audible. "I'm so sorry for who I was." Dorothy studied her for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. Sorry, don't erase pain, child. But change do. You better change for real. The words hit harder than any judge's sentence. Patricia nodded, tears threatening. That was the thing about consequences. They forced you to see yourself clearly, and sometimes what you saw was ugly beyond imagination. Meanwhile, on a completely different stage, 9-year-old Jasmine Carter stood before 3,000 people at the National Civil Rights Convention in Washington, D.C. She wore a beautiful blue dress her grandmother had made, her hair styled in natural curls with a ribbon that matched her outfit. Despite the massive crowd and the cameras filming her every move, Jasmine spoke with confidence that came from knowing she had something important to say. My name is Jasmine Carter, and 6 months ago, a woman told me I didn't belong in first class because of my skin color. She was wrong. I belong everywhere. And so do you. The crowd erupted in applause. Jasmine waited for it to die down, just like her mother had taught her, then continued. My mommy taught me that when bad things happen, we can turn them into good things. That's why we created the Jasmine Foundation to help children who face discrimination. Diane stood in the wings, watching her daughter command that stage with pride so fierce it made her chest ache. Jasmine had been through trauma that no child should experience, but she'd chosen to use it as fuel for change rather than let it make her bitter. Every child deserves to fly first class in life, Jasmine continued, her young voice carrying through the excellent sound system. Not just on airplanes, but in schools, in hospitals, in stores, everywhere. And if anyone tells you that you don't belong, you tell them, I belong here. This is my world too. The standing ovation lasted a full 3 minutes. News outlets would replay this speech hundreds of times. Jasmine became the face of a movement, a symbol of resilience and change. But more importantly, she remained just a little girl who loved peach cobbler and teddy bears and making the world better. 6 months after the incident, Skybridge Airlines Flight 2847 prepared for departure from Atlanta to Los Angeles. In first class, a black family settled into their seats. Mother, father, and 3 children ranging from 5 to 12 years old. They moved with nervous excitement, clearly not accustomed to such luxury. The father kept checking their boarding passes as if they might be wrong. Rachel, who'd been promoted to Director of Passenger Services and Training, personally greeted them at the aircraft door. Welcome aboard. You're going to have a wonderful flight. The father smiled but couldn't hide his anxiety. Thank you. This is our first time in first class. The kids are excited, but we want to make sure we do everything right. Rachel's smile was warm and genuine. You're already doing everything right. Just relax and enjoy. Every passenger deserves the best experience. No exceptions. She meant every word. The Fly with Dignity initiative had transformed airline culture, and Rachel had been instrumental in implementing the changes. As the family settled in, the youngest child noticed something. A small brass plaque on the armrest of seat 2A read, reserved for unaccompanied minors. The Jasmine Carter seat. No child flies alone in spirit. The mother read it and tears sprang to her eyes. She knew that story. Everyone knew that story. That little girl's courage had changed everything. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Diane Carter's voice came through a pre-recorded message on the safety video. At Skybridge Airlines, we believe everyone belongs. Every passenger, regardless of race, age, or background, deserves dignity and respect. My daughter Jasmine taught me that children are watching how we treat each other, learning what kind of world we're building. Let's build one where everyone can fly. The message was brief but powerful, a reminder that flew on every Skybridge aircraft now. On another flight that same day, Jasmine herself was flying back from visiting her grandmother in Atlanta. She sat in her usual seat, 2A, looking out at the clouds that still amazed her every time. Margaret sat beside her, working on a crossword puzzle. What are you thinking about, baby? The older woman asked, noticing Jasmine's thoughtful expression. The little girl was quiet for a moment, then smiled. I'm thinking that lady was right about one thing, Grandma. Margaret's eyebrows rose in surprise. What's that? Jasmine's smile widened, her eyes bright with wisdom beyond her years. I don't belong in just first class. I belong in the whole airplane. The whole world. And so does everyone else. Margaret pulled her granddaughter close, kissing the top of her head. That's exactly right, baby girl. That's exactly right. The plane soared through clear skies, carrying passengers of every background toward their destinations, a small but significant example of what America could be when people chose inclusion over hatred. The screen faded to text, based on incidents that occur daily in American aviation and beyond. Discrimination thrives in silence but dies in the light of accountability. The Fly with Dignity initiative has processed over 10,000 complaints and banned 847 passengers for discriminatory behavior since its launch. Stand up. Speak out. Change starts with one voice refusing to accept injustice. What would you have done in that first-class cabin? Would you have been Bernard, standing up immediately? Would you have been Lauren, finding your courage midway through? Or would you have stayed silent, hoping someone else would intervene? Drop your honest answer in the comments. If this story moved you, if you believe every child deserves protection, hit that like button hard. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And subscribe because we're telling more stories of ordinary people making extraordinary stands against injustice. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being the kind of person who believes in a world where everyone belongs. Until next time, remember. Your voice matters, your actions matter, and together we're building that better world Jasmine talked about. One flight, one stand, one moment of courage at a time. This story reveals profound truths about privilege, accountability, and the power of standing up against injustice. First, racism isn't always overt violence. It often appears as Patricia's polite discrimination, wrapped in concern about standards and belonging. These coded phrases perpetuate harm while allowing perpetrators to deny their prejudice. Second, silence enables oppression. Bernard, Lauren, Rachel, and Michael demonstrate that bystanders have immense power. Their willingness to speak up protected Jasmine and created a record of truth that couldn't be denied. Third, children internalize everything. Jasmine's first question after trauma was whether she'd done something wrong. This shows how discrimination doesn't just hurt in the moment but shapes how children see themselves and their place in the world. Fourth, consequences matter. Patricia faced legal, social, and professional repercussions that sent a clear message: hatred has a price. Fifth, systemic change requires leadership commitment. Diane didn't just protect her daughter. She leveraged her position to create industry-wide reforms that protect all children. Finally, healing comes through purpose. Jasmine transformed her pain into advocacy, becoming a voice for countless others who face similar discrimination. This story reminds us that everyone has a role in building a more just society, whether standing up as a witness, implementing policy changes, or simply teaching children they belong everywhere. What would you have done if you witnessed Patricia's behavior? Would you have intervened immediately or stayed silent? Drop your honest answer in the comments because your perspective matters. If you believe every child deserves dignity and respect regardless of skin color, smash that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to understand how everyday racism affects innocent children and why we all must be active participants in stopping it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're committed to sharing stories that expose injustice and celebrate those who fight against it. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of a community that refuses to accept discrimination in any form. Remember, change begins with awareness and grows through action. Together, we're building the world Jasmine described, where every child truly belongs everywhere. Until next time, stand strong, speak truth, and never underestimate the power of one voice defending what's right. May your journey always be filled with courage, compassion, and the determination to make our shared world more just for everyone.